I always say that equality is indivisible. You can't believe in equality for some without believing in equality for all. It's our statement of trans equality, which I was immensely proud to be able to issue on behalf of Welsh Government.
We recommit ourselves to supporting trans and non-binary people, and our starting point is that trans men are men, trans women are women, and non-binary identities are valid.
Trans women are women. When you hear that, it's almost like hearing 1 equals 2.
So the point is that when it pops into your head, inconvenient thoughts pop into your head, like, well, if trans women are women, obviously trans women are allowed into women's sports. But like, is that fair? Because they've been through male development, so they're going to be stronger because that's what testosterone does. And if that thought comes into your head, you need to be able to loop back and just say trans women are women, full stop. Because otherwise you'll find yourself in the very inconvenient place of realizing that this is not fair.
Yeah.
And then you've got to bounce back and think, well, that means they're not really women, at least for the purposes of sport. And then you think, well, what about sex crimes? What about prisons? What about, whatever? And then suddenly you're down the rabbit hole and you too are a heretic and you're cast out. So it is specifically, that's how trans women or women functions. It's not really meant to be a truth as such. It's meant to be like a mystery.
In May 2023, pronoun badges at the Urdd Eisteddfod were distributed to those young people who wanted them. Merched Cymru expressed concerns. These concerns were dismissed by Jeremy Miles. In December 2023, draft guidance was distributed to schools in England in how to manage gender-questioning children. The guidance stated that the preferred pronouns should not be used for primary school children, and they should only be used for secondary school children if teachers are confident that the benefit to the child outweighs the impact on the school community. Andrew Doyle explains the problem with preferred pronouns.
Often people say, why does anyone care about pronouns? Just put it at the end of your email. Just start a meeting with your pronoun. Why do you care? It's a distraction. It's not a distraction, because what is that doing there? When you announce your pronouns or ask someone else to do the same, you are saying that you have to make it a declaration of religious faith. You're saying that I believe in a thing called gender identity and you should as well. And we don't ask people at the start of business meetings or on emails to declare their fealty to Baal, the fertility god, or whatever like that. We don't do it. So it is and most importantly, the idea of pronouns has become the mechanism by which compelled speech is introduced to various governments. It happened in Canada. It happened in Australia. It might very well happen here. So what I'm saying is what seems very, very trivial is actually really, really significant. It also disconnects people from the truth that there are only two sexes and no one has ever changed sex. It promotes that idea amongst children. We have seen that now. I mean, young people now routinely say their pronouns at the start of meetings. Actors who don't say their pronouns at the start of rehearsal processes don't get cast again. People don't get promotions if they don't do it. So it is a very dangerous situation that we're in. And we've even seen children put onto pathway to sterilization, medicalization. The consequences are huge. So what I'm saying is don't be fooled by the people who say, that's trivial, just say a pronoun and it's fine, because the consequences are the mutualization and heterosexualization of gay kids and the erosion of women's single-sex spaces.
In December 2023, the Department of Education released draft guidance for schools in England for dealing with gender-questioning children. Although many people do not believe the guidance goes far enough, it does make it plain that the schools should be extremely cautious about socially transitioning a child. The guidance states, the CAS review is clear that social transition is not a neutral act and that better information is needed about the outcomes for children who undertake degrees of social transition. This means that schools and colleges should take a cautious approach and that decisions should never be taken in haste or without the involvement of parents. Schools and colleges should consider how best to fulfill their safeguarding duties towards the child who is making such a request and their peers, ensuring that any agreed course of action is in all of their best interests. This advice is in complete contrast to the advice supplied by the Welsh Government In a school and community-based operating toolkit document, it states, a growing number of children and young people identify within a range of gender spectrums, with research indicating the effects of early transition having a positive impact on well-being. One such study from Canada found a drop in attempted suicides of transitioning young people when parents-carers were supportive and affirming. Appropriate therapeutic care is embedded within a person-centred approach of acceptance, empathy and unconditional positive regard, which can lead us to believe we have a non-judgmental approach in all of our work. The document then refers to Sam Hope, a therapist, and links to a PDF document produced by him, which advises schools to ensure that staff receive training from trans-led agencies, to ensure that trans people are celebrated, to allow trans students to use facilities of their identified gender, to find alternative expressions to boys and girls, to not out trans students to their parents, to use the known as name of the trans student, to encourage peer support, to set zero tolerance for misgendering, and to not gatekeep. The Digon group at Ysgol Gyfun Plasmawr provide a case study of how this is working out.
Can we just normalise queer identities and keep the diversity moving through the whole curriculum?
We are fed up with teachers only dealing with queer phobia when it's convenient for them.
When breaking the school dress code is taken more seriously than rape threats.
We want 100 boxes ticked every day. We want to learn about the legalisation of being LGBTQ+.
The Stonewall uprising.
The history of pride and how it's important.
How to be a good ally.
Intersectionality.
The importance of untokenistic representation.
How queer relationships work.
We need this because it's important for queer kids to get an equal education of relationships and sexualities. It normalises LGBTQ+ identities for everyone, and it makes the world a more accepting, understanding and easier place to live. Don't simplify, don't erase us.
I fi, mae bod yn traws yn meddwl fi bod yn fy hun heb poeni am beth mae pobl arall yn meddwl ac yn bod yn greiddiol I pwy ydw I tu fewn. Fi'r middle child, felly'n tyfu lan oedd chwarae efo pethau masculine a fel brwydro efo brodyr fi yn rhywbeth really normal I fi. Ond oedd pethau bach yna, ond nothing fel oedd yn screamo, I'm trans. Ond edrych yn ôl, mae llawer o bethau yn neud lot o synwyr. Nes I ddod mas I cwbl o ffrindiau, ddim llawer o bobl. Wedyn, pryd o'n i'n 16, des I mas I rhieni fi. Nath o ddim dechrau mas yn amazing, ond nawr maen nhw'n really supportive. Nes I ddim bod mor agored ac ydw I nawr. Pryd ni dal yn ysgol, ond erbyn nawr fel mae enw fi a pronouns fi ar Instagram fi a fi'n really cyfforddus efo just pawb yn gwybod pwy ydw I.
How my mum's definitely opened up to change in front of Joey.
She's always been like lovely, but she has said to me like it's something that in the past she hasn't understood. My high school was very good with things like that. Like we had Digon being like basically the most perfect group that I could have possibly asked for. but I know for a fact that that is not the case in most schools. O blwyddyn saith, o day one, mae digon di bodoli ac di bod yn peth normal. Fi'n meddwl bod yn yr ystafell yma gyda'r grŵp o bobl yn gwneud gymaint o wahaniaeth oherwydd efo'r ystafell yma a'r pobl yma, mae'r drysau'r agor a mae unrhyw un sy'n eisiau cerdded mewn yn gallu cerdded mewn.
Fi'n meddwl mae'n bwysig iawn cael cymuned yn yr ysgol ble chi'n gwybod bod chi'n gallu troi lan a teimlo fel bod dim beirniadaeth o gwbl am unrhyw profiadau chi eisiau rhannu neu jyst y ffordd chi'n edrych a'r ffordd chi'n ymddwyn.
Fi'n meddwl eleni dyn ni kind of di cael y cyfle i cario ymlaen y gwaith y tŷ fel stat o lan. So dyn ni flwyddyn yma yn trio integreiddio fwy o gwersi lles a'r rhagenwau yn ogystal â cynnal fwy o gwasanaethau, hyfforddi staff.
Fi heb gwybod plas mawr heb so fi ddim yn teimlo fel fi'n appreciate fe digon.
Dwi'n meddwl mae'n gyd lawr i reassurance mae'n gwneud y ysgol yn teimlo mor saff a pethau fel hynna.
Fi'n teimlo fel bod fi'n perthyn i rhywbeth really pwysig.
I fi fel person traws hoyw ifanc, oedd e'n really bwysig i mi cael fel yr grŵp gweledol yna o ddisgyblion oedd yn barod i kind of bod fel ffrindiau chi. A fi'n meddwl bod pob ysgol jyst angen cael those brave people i ddweud na dyma beth fi'n credu a fi eisiau gwneud yr lle yma yn lle saff I bobl o fewn yr cymuned.
Jeremy Miles sees the Digon Group at Ysgol Govan Plasmawr as an example of best practice.
I've been visiting Ysgol Govan Plasmawr and meeting with Digon, which is the LGBTQ plus peer group, and also Balch, which is the Black Asian minority ethnic peer group. And it's been fantastic hearing them talk about the pupil voice that they have in the school, both in terms of the curriculum, but also the life of the school. From September, we are rolling out our new curriculum, which is inclusive, represents all the communities of Wales, and schools have a real role in providing a safe space for pupils in the way that Digon and Balch have been telling me about today. I'd love to see all schools in Wales having peer support groups in the way that Plasmawr have.
Jeremy Miles seems to have been very influenced by trans-identified males who have a strong vested interest in pushing the belief that they were born with a gender identity that was different from their biological sex. All are supportive of the use of puberty blockers for gender-questioning young people. Kat Burton, Chair of Trustees at GIAS and member of the Welsh Government independent LGBTQ plus expert panel, transitioned in his 50s, although he tells people he was female from birth.
I mean, we were asked today, what would we like to see as a definition of sex and a definition of gender? Fortunately, the answer that pretty much all of us agreed on was we wouldn't like to see anybody try to define them as a general rule. Because if they did, the fact that English law doesn't recognise any difference between sex and gender in most English law would mean that most English law would have to be rewritten to differentiate between one and the other. Because, you know, if it says gender, it means sex. And if it says sex, it means gender. The difference is a recent one. But if we need to look into what is sex, what we must avoid is the simple fact that the protests against us being female or male are using Year 11 science to try and justify their arguments. They are quite literally saying chromosomes are king. If you're XX, you're female. If you're XY, you're male. And that's utter rubbish.
Burton is a great advocate for the use of puberty blockers.
Non-timely intervention for trans young people can be a lifelong tragedy. And I just wanted to say that, yes, the vast majority just need socialisation and support and talk. But at TANA Stage 2, there is a very limited window of opportunity to prevent long-term damage from inappropriate puberty. And that's where puberty blockers are essential. And those puberty blockers really need to be prescribed at the onset of Tanner stage 2.
Kate Hutchinson from Diversity Role Models and Pride Cymru is a member of the independent LGBTQ+ expert panel. He is a highly influential figure within the Welsh Government and knows some influential people. He does not believe that the massive rise in the number of young people identifying as trans is a social contagion, and he advises people working with gender-questioning children to use the services of mermaids and gendered intelligence. He really believes that trans girls are girls.
It's about making sure those young people get the same opportunities as every other child in school to achieve, to learn. Because if we're not supporting them in their identity, which is a core part of who they are, we are not giving them the same opportunities as the other children.
Hutchinson describes puberty blockers as being like pressing a pause button.
They may be prescribed hormone blockers, which are a thing that puts puberty on hold. It's like pressing the pause button.
Alex Drummond has been invited into Ysgol Gyfun Plasmawr to talk about his experiences of being a lesbian. Drummond explains how he became aware that he was a lesbian.
I think it's kind of important to communicate the idea of transgender, illustrate the possibilities. I mean, I'd never even heard of transgender before the age of 40, and it was only when I was researching gender theory as part of my master's that I discovered all of this like amazing science.
Drummond sees himself as a positive role model. As he says, if a child sees me and thinks, bloody hell, so it's not as simple as pink or blue or football or ballet, there must be 101 possibilities in between, then maybe I can serve the greater good. Heather Pito, former trans officer for LGBT Labour and beneficiary of the Joe Cox Women in Leadership Training Scheme, uses common tactics of trans activists. Number 1, present yourself as a victim. Number 2, denigrate your opponents. Number 3, shut down discussion. Number 4, tell untruths. Number 5, use motive, hyperbolic language. In response to his allegations, campaign group Women's Place UK posted a public letter to LGBT Labour. Women's Place UK campaigners have never engaged in harassment or said any of the things Peters claims. We contribute to a widening debate. That is not hate. Pito, along with other trans-identified males, has signed a petition organised by GenderGP, the online drug supplier for gender-confused children, which is run by doctors Helen and Michael Webley. The list of signatories also included Monroe Bergdorf, a trans-identified male, and United Nations Women's UK Women's Champion for 2024. Petition letter stated, despite the World Health Organization thankfully declassifying their diagnostic category of gender incongruence as a mental illness in 2018, there is something about gender diversity which makes some people very afraid. Mention children and the levels of hysteria rise further, as borne out by regular tabloid headlines denying and ridiculing those who are simply not comfortable with the gender they were assigned at birth. Yet, research recently published in the Journal of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry reveals that when children are allowed to transition, including the use of puberty blockers, it improves their mental health. An input to the CAS review was a report produced by the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, which looked at a number of studies on the effectiveness of puberty blockers. The investigation concluded that there was no compelling evidence that the administration of puberty blockers improved the quality of life. In response to a question from Laura Ann Jones, Mark Drakeford asserted that the Welsh Government had a broader set of evidence.
WISC intend to ask for expressions of interests from those in the field for a gender identity development service for Wales, and that will be informed by the Cass review, by the conversations that we will have with Dr. Cass, but also by a broader set of evidence that we have here in Wales.
This evidence is detailed in the LGBTQ+ action plan, where a study by trans-identified male and law professor Florence Ashley was referenced. The action plan states, delaying or preventing a person from having their identity respected can have a negative impact on their lives. The document links to a paper by Ashley which concludes that unbounded social transition and ready access to puberty blockers ought to be treated as the default option, and support should be offered to parents who may have difficulty accepting their youth. Ashley is a colourful character and holds opinions which may confuse Welsh sheep farming families who know the difference between a ram and a ewe. Ashley has evidently experienced trauma in his past. He tweets that he is inebriated on weekday nights and posts videos on TikTok to prove it.
As a law professor who teaches criminal law, I felt compelled to inform you to be gay, do crimes. Also, look at my pretty earrings today.
In his latest book, Gender Fucking, The Pleasures and Politics of Living in a Gendered Body, Ashley writes, I fuck, date and love trans girls, even when neither of us knows we are. I love them before they come out, holding open the possibility that every cis person is at a stage of becoming towards transness. I love them so much, I make trans girls. It may not be quite true, but I feel it in my bones. It seems peculiar that the systematic review of evidence of the effectiveness of puberty blockers conducted by NICE was rejected in favour of evidence provided by a somewhat eccentric law professor. But Jeremy Miles is fully committed.
Whenever we have cabinet discussions about the LGBTQ+ action plan, everyone is supportive, everyone's on board, everyone's looking for ways of making a difference. And I think that is the real thing.
One suggestion which I would never be allowed to say on Twitter, carefully if you tweet this, is that trans women are men with a certain type of psychological disorder which creates an insatiable need to present in the same way as a woman. But it doesn't mean that we're a woman.
And why can't we say that?
Because it denies people's identity.
And the member and people like her spent the whole of April trying to raise these dog whistle concerns.
I would like to see more cases, more examples being made of politicians who are making those kind of statements for completely political, electoral reasons, just to whip up hate, basically. Just dog whistles, as Jeremy Miles said earlier today.